So welcome to our webinar, everyone. Again, my name is Holly Cardozo. I'm a member of the marketing team with SAI Global, and I'll be the moderator for today's webinar on ISO 45001, the 2008 standard. Our presenter today is Khurshid Kutgi, and he is a trainer and consultant with SAI Global. He has over 20 years experience with occupational health and safety standards. He's held a number of different roles over the years, from operational, technical, training, and holds a seat on a number of different committees that focus on standard development and OHS. So with that, Khurshid, I welcome you. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Holly, and hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. We'll move to the first slide, Holly. All right, this first slide talks to us about what we're going to cover, and is primarily going to be focused not on migration, not primarily on integration, but what we're going to talk about is we'll talk to you about the most significant change, which is the structure of the standard has changed. So we'll talk about the structure of the standard, how the flow works, what the requirements are, and we'll review some of the key requirements of the standard. In this short time frame, obviously, we cannot cover every single component, but I'll touch upon these. I'll show you where they line up and how they link with the overall management system process. And most importantly, it's important that I help you understand what you need to do to meet these requirements and where you need documented information. And the reason we focused on these 4 key points is these are the ones that we're being asked a lot of questions about in the technical committees and in other areas as well. When we talk to companies, they say, we don't understand what this means and so on. What's the context of the organization? And some of these definitions are new to us who are interested parties. So we'll touch upon these things, and please feel we'll try and keep some time for the end for a question and answer session. We'll move on, Holly.
So Khurshid, we'll just dive right into the
so
first
we'll take
poll.
Our first poll, and I'll let Holly take that.
Yeah, absolutely. So Khurshid had mentioned, and when we were developing, that he would be very keen to learn where folks are in their journey, and this will help to cater the content of the presentation a little bit as we go. So let me launch it here, and I'll invite you to select a response that's most suited to your current scenario. So where are you now in your occupational health and safety management system journey? So perhaps you're brand new to it. Let me launch the poll here. You're brand new to it, and this is sort of your first step. Perhaps you have some basic knowledge. Perhaps you have some experience with working with OHS systems, or perhaps you're well on your way. Maybe you're currently certified to the OHS 18001 standard, or you just have a really good understanding. So we'll leave folks for about 15 seconds. We have a very fast response today, Khurshid.
That's great.
That's excellent. Well, thank you very much, everyone. So let me close and share. So the majority of the folks are either brand new or have a basic knowledge. So that's 55%.
That's great. And I see that about 30% have good understanding as well. So you've got a very, very good mix of participants. And one of the things I'm going to try and explain here about this poll here, and a new concept in the standard is what we call understanding the context of the organization, understanding the needs of interested parties. So here I am asking you are the interested parties who have joined this webinar. I'm trying to understand what are your needs here. And this is something you all should be doing when you are working on your occupational health and safety system. So this, in essence, is a practice of what we are going to be doing while we actually work with the standard. So I've understood now that about 30% are new to the standard, so I should target my exercises and the explanations along those lines. So this is very valuable information, and we'll move on here to the next poll question very quickly.
Yeah, okay. So what's your primary driver, I guess would be the question. Eh? Why is an occupational health and safety management system important to your organization? So again, just kind of the top one, if you want to select, let me launch it here. So perhaps it's because you have a customer request. You want to reduce illnesses and injuries, sort of a strategic priority. Perhaps it's for cost savings. Maybe it's management commitment to OHS objectives and they drive the need for the standard. Or perhaps it's to avoid prosecution. So I'll give folks about 15 more seconds. What's been your experience, Kershid? Why do folks endeavor to become certified to an OHS standard?
The reason I put these down, these are actual reasons that have been given by companies, and I'll elaborate a little bit more. But particularly a customer request one. It's actually a requirement in the standard for a company that has a management system.
Yeah, okay.
That they will try to they ask their suppliers and so people who purchase services and products to comply with occupational health and safety components. Mm-hmm. So we'll see what the results show up here now.
Okay, let me close and share here. So 51% say that it's management commitment, so it's management driven, and then the second place would be reduction in illnesses and injuries. Third place would be that customer request.
That's really, really good. And one of the things now first I asked you what is your purpose for coming here, and now this is why you're coming here. And the reason I asked this, I have been to companies where they have been compelled by an external organization, we have to do this. And that is not self-motivating. When you see something like this where management commitment is on board, or you're doing it for the reasons of reducing illness injuries, this means I care about the people at my workplace. These are key success factors. If you have these, as all of you all, the majority of you all have this, only 13% or 14% are looking at other reasons. Cost savings is only 2%. The surprising statistic is that if you spend $1 on occupational health and safety, the return on that investment is between $2 to $7. So you have a huge return on investing in occupational health and safety. And this data was compiled years ago when we did a lot of work with what used to be called the Industrial Accident Prevention Association. They had gathered this data and published it as well. So there is a significant cost benefit, but it's not very easily compiled, and companies aren't necessarily aware of this. The biggest cost saving is, of course, you have more people working on the job because of fewer illnesses and so on. So you have more on-time people. If you have reduced injuries, you have reduced insurance costs, premiums, and so on. And it improves employee morale in many ways as well. So there's huge benefits for an OHSMS. All right. So let's get into the details now. The structure of the standard is it's the most significant change, actually, people say. It's completely different. For those of you who are familiar with the older standard, I know that about 30% are completely new to the standard, so I won't delve too much upon changes, and this is deliberate. But there's 10 sections in the standard, and I'll go through each of these in turn. I won't focus on every single requirement or sub-clause. I'll focus on the ones that require explanation. Many of these are very, very easy to understand and self-explanatory. So we'll focus on what needs clarification or where the concepts are relatively new or require elaboration. So the first one, of course, is the scope. But keep in mind, I won't go through all of these in detail right now. The slides will be there. We talk about it. The second is definitions and so on, terms and definitions, normative references. And then clauses 4 to 10 are the important ones. And we'll start by moving to the next slide, Holly, again. I think that's not the right one. Okay, that's fine. All right. With the right one. Okay, that's right. Okay, so now we're looking at this structure. The most important thing is these 10 sections of the standard are consistent now across all of the core standards. By core standards, we're talking about the ISO 9001 Quality Management System Standard. We're talking about the 14001 Environmental Standard, and now the 45001 Occupational Health and Safety Standard. All of these have identical structure of 10 sections and very similar or identical wording for many of the requirements. This makes it easier for you to run an integrated management system and integrate all of the requirements with your business processes, which is also a requirement of the standard. So there's many, many advantages to this, which we'll talk about also when we talk a little bit later about integrating, if that's an important thing for companies. It gives companies a lot of benefits and efficiencies because you don't have to do things twice. And I'll give you some examples as we go along as well. And this is in line with the Plan, Do, Check, Act model that has always been used by these standards, ISO 9001, 14001, and the 14001. So there's many advantages to this standardized structure. In these, on this slide, you see the clauses on top in the clouds, not necessarily in each case. On the top left corner, you'll see issues and clause 4.1. On the right side, you'll see scope of the QMS 431 and 44. On the top again, you see planning, but right in the middle, leadership. That impacts every single thing. It's the most important component, having good leadership here. And we'll go through these in more detail. This is the standard model. It starts with obviously understanding all the inputs, putting them into a plan, then start having the support services in place, then get the job done, evaluate that we're doing the job correct in the check cycle, and then keep on improving the process. So it goes clockwise from the top, basically from the very top, which is the clouds coming in and feeding into the plan. From the plan, you go to the do, the check, and the act. We'll move on, Holly. And this is a similar image, but this is straight from the standard. So it starts on the top left corner with understanding the external and internal issues. And then on the top right corner is 4.2. You'll see those small numbers below the text. Needs and expectations of workers and other interested parties. You have to have these as critical inputs to your overall management system. Without these two critical inputs, your management system will not be as effective as you can make it. So these are very critical issues, and we'll speak about these two things in great depth. And then once we have these two things known, now we can go, because what we've done is understand the context of the organization, what are the external issues and the internal issues, and what our interested parties are wanting from us, how that can affect our occupation health and safety system. And then we can get kicking with the planning, the support services, leadership, and so on. So the sequencing and the numbering of the clauses is also very logical. It starts with understanding requirements not just of relate to. And then once we've got that, what are our needs as well? That's clause 8 on the right hand side. And then evaluate, are we achieving what we wanted to do? And if we're not doing it, correct it. If we are doing it, keep on improving and get back to planning all the time. So it's a very logical cycle of Plan, Do, Check, Act. Next slide. All right. So for those of you, about 60% of you all who have some familiarity with the standard, you will see that the Plan, Do, Check, Act is there. The process approach has always been there. Top management was there as a definition and so on. But the key component is that the top management components have been significantly enhanced. There is a clear requirement now that top management has to really do things and not delegate activities. And we'll talk about these in greater detail. Hazard, risk, and control was always there. Planning, policy, objectives, all of these were there. Resource requirements, legal requirements. So all of these are things that if you're familiar with the standard, you're aware about. Improving objectives, monitoring, consulting, training, and competency requirements. And these are fairly standard things that are intuitive to anybody working in a workplace. If I'm going to be there, I will normally on the first day be told about the health and safety hazards in the workplace and what I should do, who I should go to if I have problems with, and so on. And my right to refuse work if it's unsafe, consultation. And then I may receive training. And what am I supposed to be checking? So these are the kinds of things I'll be given certain resources to do my job. So all of these are standardized things, and they're in the standard as before, just in different places now because the structure has changed. Next step, next slide. What's new? These are the clauses that I'll be speaking to in greater detail. Understanding the context in its organization and its context, understanding the needs and expectation of workers and other interested parties, leadership and commitment, 5.1. That's one of the most important clauses where there's significant changes. and risks and opportunities, the risk-based thinking. This is something that is going to be crucial, and I'll try and give examples because that's the best way to illustrate the concepts. Assessment of OHS opportunities. Every time there's a risk or you make a change, there's also an opportunity. And I'll give you some examples of those as well. Once you know what these opportunities are or what the risks are, you'll plan to take action to reduce the risk, eliminate the hazards, and in the case of opportunities, how can we take advantage and make our business more competitive? And then in procurement areas, contractors, outsourcing, there's a lot more detail and clarity on what the organization should do, because it's been noticed over the years that the people who are quite often harmed or bring in potential hazards and risks are people who are not familiar with our workplace. So how do we control those things? And very importantly, compliance, evaluation of compliance has always been there, but there's some new nuances. We touch upon those very briefly. So this is what you're going to focus on largely in the next 30 minutes or so. Right? Next slide. Here we have the scope of the standard. This is the first section of the standard out of those 10 standards, and you'll see the big red circle on the right top corner in each case. So the scope of the standard is different from the scope of your company's management system. That will come in a later slide. So the standard specifies requirements and provides a framework for you, your organization, to develop and implement and maintain a management system to control occupation health and safety hazards and risks. The standard also provides guidance on how to use the standard. Very often, auditors and companies, they read the main text of the standard from section 1 to 10, but Annex A is the one where you will get great clarity. It gives you examples of how to actually achieve each requirement of the standard. So for those of you who have a copy of the standard, you must try and spend a little time. Okay, read this requirement of the standard, but see what Annex A says, because that will literally shine a bright light on the concepts that are talked about in the standard. The standard is what is must be done, but the annex has a lot of guidance, and that's very important for companies to effectively implement each of those requirements. The intended outcomes of any occupational health and safety is to provide safe and healthy workplaces. And I was really delighted to see about 80% of you all have that as one of your main drivers, primarily because your management is pushing it, and that's also what you are trying to achieve. Fulfillment of legal and other requirements is a mandatory requirement, whether you have a management system or not. You always have to comply with legal requirements. But in order to do that, you must know what these legal requirements are. Only then can you comply. So we'll touch upon this. It has always been in the earlier standards. So the most important components are, how will we find out what the legal and other requirements are? Very often, the competency for this is not within the company. So companies hire a consulting organization or an individual who knows what the legal requirements are for this particular industry. If you're in the chemicals industry, the legal requirements will be different. If you're in the mining industry, the requirements will be different. So somebody who is competent and understands these legal requirements will tell you this is what you have to follow. Once you have that, now you have a framework and a baseline on which to work and see where you're meeting the requirement or not meeting the requirement. And if you're not meeting the requirement, you must get to work on it right away before it becomes a serious issue. Preventing work-related injury and illness, the principle of every management system. And most importantly, you're required now by the standard to continually improve your OHS performance and show trends. So we had so many training courses on health and safety last year. We now have so many more. You trained so many people on this. We've managed to get improved performance on safety. We had fewer illnesses, fewer days away because of injuries and so on. So these are the kinds of metrics that you should be focusing on to demonstrate your continual improvement. I've listed a few terms and definitions. So section 2 is what's called a normative reference. Now, a normative reference is something that is mandatory, and some standards have them, not all, mind you. As an example, in the ISO 9001 quality management standard, they have one normative references. The 9001 standard tells you what's required, but all the terms and definitions and the guidance is in another document called ISO 9000. And you're required, it's a normative reference, normative means required and mandated, to use 9001 as well. And there are terms and definitions in section 3. Within this standard, there are no normative references. That's on the first line there, right on top here. And the reason is that we have all of the definitions needed included within this standard, and any guidance is provided in Annex A. So if I look at these definitions, I've listed a few ones that are of relevance, I think, and I'll touch upon just a few key definitions. For example, let's take a look at the first one. Who is an interested party? Because this is a term that you're going to come across repeatedly in the standard. An interested party is any person or organization that can be affected or can affect your decisions or activities. And these, we'll touch upon who these might be in an example later on. Who is a worker? This wasn't defined clearly before. Any person doing work under the control of the organization. Then participation and consultation have been referenced earlier. Participation means you're actually involved in decision making, whereas consultation is, I'll take your opinion, I'll get your views, and I'll take it into account and consider it. So participation is absolute engagement. Consultation means I am involved in some way, but not in a decision-making capacity. And who is top management? You'll see that word all the time. This is a person or a group who direct and control the organization at the highest level. Now, if you're a very large corporation, a conglomerate, it doesn't mean that I have to go to the global corporate office if I'm auditing a subsidiary location. I'll be talking to the top people at the location that is being audited or that we are working in. So there's many other definitions. Like I said, there's 37 of them, and it helps to understand what they really mean. And it only makes sense when you read them in the context of the specific requirement. So this is 2 and 3. And once you're done with these administrative components, we now get to the real nitty-gritty of the working with the standards. So we'll move to the next slide, Holly. This is the single most important section I'm going to be talking about, 4.1, 4.2, and 6.1, and I'll show that linkage. This is very new, and it's important that we focus on this. You did notice that when we had the polls, I mentioned that I'll talk to you about what the context of the organization is and illustrate it. I have to understand what are the internal and external issues that can affect your OH&S management system. In my situation right now, I'm not talking about an OH&S management system, but like I mentioned, these clauses are identical in the quality management system and the environmental system. So from a quality perspective in delivering this webinar, what are the external issues that could affect me? I could have a power breakdown here, my computer breaks down, my microphone fails and you can't hear a thing. All of these are external issues, or maybe they're internal as well. So I must understand and plan for these risks. If everything goes off and I can still pick up a phone and talk to you because I have a backup printout of the slides, I've tried to preempt a complete failure to deliver the webinar. What are the needs and expectations of workers? In my context here right now, what are the needs of this group? Why do you want to implement a system? That will help me to explain things. So now when you're looking at occupational health and safety, you should be asking exactly these same things. And the third component is determining the scope of the management system. The management system scope we'll talk about in greater detail as well. And now you take all of these inputs and then start looking at what are the risks and hazards. And we'll come back to the concept of hazards and risks now in the next slide. So here are some examples. External issues. You have subcontractors and suppliers coming into your workplace. They bring their tools into your workplace. They leave some chemicals behind that they're using and they're left over there overnight. The cleaning crew comes, they don't know what they are. There's a spill over there. I don't have safety data sheets. What do I have? I have a problem. A supplier comes. He comes into my facility and he's saying, here's some free samples for you to try. And the people in the warehouse said, okay, has somebody ordered them? Yes, I spoke to so-and-so. And the warehouse person says, but do you have safety data sheets for these? Yeah, we'll ship them across to you. I think they've mailed them to you. Can you keep them here? Should you be accepting such stuff? Very, very questionable. You don't know what it is. If somehow, again, somebody says, what's this stuff? It looks like it's a cleaning material for the machine. I'll use it. And they touch it or they may have contact with it, the fumes, and they don't know how to respond to it. Hazard and risk occupy. What about market conditions? These are huge external issues, and we see that happening every day. Your key suppliers are based in the Far East or in somewhere or some other country. And you have a situation now that they are no longer supplying the same material. They say we've made some small changes to this, and you don't know what those changes are. But you continue using that chemical or that product, and you don't know if there's any new risks imposed. So what about legal and regulatory changes? Very, very crucial external issue. How do you engage with the people who are making these changes? Can you be a participant in them? Get on the committees. What about your competitors? They're gunning for you. They want to know what you're doing. They can take away your key people, your number one design person, your number one safety person, the person who does all your lockout and tag out. He retires. Political conditions. These can put big stresses on a company as well. Social and cultural influences. Very, very important. How you approach people when you're talking to them about safety is very important. You engage them respectfully, you'll get buy-in. If you order people around, as of tomorrow, I want everybody to wear these kind of equipment, whether you like it or not. And that might not go down as easily. What about extreme weather? Can cause huge health and safety issues in companies. Flooding, earthquakes. Are we prepared for all of these external issues? The media says this company is doing this. Their safety practices are very questionable, and they've had a lot of incidents. How will that affect your business as a whole? So there's many, many things that have to be considered by the organization, and you must really work hard at understanding every single thing that you can, because now these are going to feed into your risk assessments as well. What about internal issues? What if your management is not as committed as most of yours? Your people are your management is engaged. When I see 51% of the management as the reason for your system being management initiatives, I'm very encouraged. Your leadership is going to be very, very supportive of your activities. What's the organizational structure like? Do we have the resources? I know a case where the company said, no, we will not do this. We don't have the money for it. But it was a legal requirement. And they said, we will do it later on when you have the money. I had to write them up. It's a non-conformity. You're not meeting a legal requirement, and you're not committing the resources. So these are key internal issues that can make a difference. What about technologies? If you don't keep abreast of new technologies for safety, then you could be possibly not doing your due diligence in those cases. Are you aware of what the standards are for forklift operations, for transportation, for automated requirements, robotics? You need to know if there's regulatory requirements, if there's standards, and make sure you keep sort of informed and implement these changes. How do you have people make sure that they understand the knowledge and the competence, and are you constantly changing? What about your workplace? It's a very old workplace. We may have some leakages over here. People could slip. There's mold maybe in that area. All of these things are internal issues. What about the culture? Most important parameter. Do people share information with each other? When I walk around and go into an occupational health and safety audit, I talk to the person who's my guide, very often the management representative. And if I see the people waving at the person and saying, hello, Jill, how are you? How was your day? I know it's a communal atmosphere. People are engaging and not afraid to walk up and tell them, look, I know you're busy right now. I have something to share with you later on. That's a great indicator. If, on the other hand, I see as soon as this person comes, they turn and start focusing on their work or walk away, that tells me the culture is not as open and conducive to a collaborative work environment. So these are all factors for you to think about. And this is a crucial, crucial requirement. Determining external and internal issues. Issues means these are things of concern for your company. You must know what they are and make sure you write down and have evidence to show that you identified these. Let's move to the next slide, Holly. Holly? Okay, all right. Parties are, all right. Yeah. So now we come to the needs and expectations of these interested parties. We've got external and internal issues, but these issues are caused by or affected by interested parties. They could be lobby groups, for example. A lobby group says, no, we do not want to see all these trucks coming into our area. And we think you're carrying very hazardous chemicals and you're dumping stuff in the water, and this could be hazardous to our health. So you have to be very careful. Who are these interested parties? And know what their needs and expectations are. You could also have interested parties as the owners of the company. They want the return on the investment. Your customers will be interested. What's in the food I'm buying from your company? I don't like this packaging material. I don't think it has a peculiar smell. Is it some plastic that's potentially causing it? What about this glue that you're using over here? You have to talk about health and emergency response service providers. They should know what chemicals are in your facility. In the event of an emergency, they are the ones who will be able to help you. Your fire department. So you need to know who are the other interested parties that have a relevance to and an interest in your company's management system as well. Owners, financiers, customers, your local community. I get a lot of bad smell from the smokestack in your facility. I have a lot of noise in this area and it's affecting my health. All of these things are things you need to think about. The needs and the expectations of workers, firstly, and the interested parties. The workers are crucial. They know exactly what's happening, and you have to have that. So workers, we know who they are, and we have systems and methods to get their participation and involvement. And we'll talk about that later. But all these others, the owners, customers, community, how are you going to know what their needs and expectations are? The only way to do it is engage with them, talk to them, and bring them into your facility, show your facility around. And that way you will reassure them and maybe get some ideas. Can you do something about this? You will therefore be a better member of society as well, and your company will be seen as a valuable organization in the economy of the local community. This is a crucial component. So 4.1 and 4.2 are very, very important for your occupational health and safety system, because these will be used now for your risk-based thinking, which we'll talk about in section 6. Next slide, Holly. Right, the scope of your management system is very simple. My company manufactures computers. We make computers, laptop computers. We also make cameras and television sets. And the occupational health and safety is for this facility in Hamilton or in Kitchener or wherever, or in Austin, Texas, or wherever it might be. So the boundaries and the products and the activities and the service. We also do servicing, or we do air conditioning servicing, or we do painting work on site. Whatever the activity, the product, or the service is what is the scope of your management system, and then you will focus and build your management system for those boundaries and the products and services. So this is fairly straightforward when you have a management system. Next slide. Now we come to, again, a very, very critical slide. We've gone from 4.1 to 4.2, 4.3 we've covered, and now we come to the leadership requirements. This is one of the most significant changes in the standard. Top management. We did mention that top management are the people who direct and control the organization at the highest level. They are now required to demonstrate leadership and commitment. These bullet points that I'm going to go through with you are actions that topmost people in the company must do themselves. They cannot say, okay, Jill, I want you to send out this communication on my behalf or about how important the occupational health and safety system is. But the requirement of the standard is top management must demonstrate leadership and commitment by communicating. They are the ones who must do the communication. They cannot delegate this. They are the ones who must take responsibility and accountability. They can't say, no, I told Sam to do this job and I followed up later, but I don't think he's done it. No, they have to take accountability and responsibility for preventing injury, ill health, providing safe and healthy. This is a responsibility that they cannot delegate. They must direct and support persons to contribute to the implementation and improvement. If I tell you, I want you to work on improving the safety of this packaging process in our plant, and then you don't give me the support I need, then I am failing as a leader. My top management has failed me. And as an auditor, I delve into this. You've been told to do this. Can you tell me the status of this? Yes, we are said we don't have the budget for it right now. So make do with whatever we can at this time. The method is going to fail. I will not be able to succeed in the effective implementation to improve the health and safety. I'm having a lot of trouble with the packaging area because people are getting injured, they're getting cuts and bruises, and they're getting backaches from all the training or not giving them the training. So if I don't direct and support, the top management is held accountable for this. Next slide. Support other management roles to demonstrate leadership. This is a very difficult one to look at. How do I see that the top management is making sure that every other management departmental head or whoever they may be or supervisors are able to demonstrate leadership and take a lead role in pushing health and safety? They have to develop, lead, and promote a culture that supports an effective woman. And how can this be done? This is one of the most difficult things. Culture is the single most important thing. I can tell you a story about a company that I audited really for about 4 or 5 years, and they always had significant issues. The senior leadership of that company was primarily very disengaged from the day-to-day operations. They would have meetings with their top management, but the senior most people would not always be visible. Well, after about 3 years, the management changed. They had a new general manager. And when I was going on my audit walk around with my guide, I saw this gentleman and I saw him looking at some equipment, and he's looking at this furnace and he's saying, yeah, what's happening here? He's talking to one of the workers over there. Saying, yes, we're down for maintenance on this and we've got some crew coming in to do this work. Now at about 11 o'clock, I had a meeting with the managing director and the general manager. And I said, this is the person who's walking around. And he said, yes, I start my day by walking around and talking to the employees there. That company in 2 years had a huge turnaround in their occupational health and safety performance. People were engaged now. They knew that they could talk to the topmost person because he's going to be walking around sometime in the morning. And he's asking us about what we're going to do. And he'd ask them, how's your family? Do you have enough time to spend with your children? Small things. It builds a culture of togetherness, of brotherhood, of sisterhood. And this is crucial to building a culture. And very importantly, they have the responsibility to protect workers from reprisal if they report hazards or risks. This is again critical. This is what causes a healthy culture. People will now come forward. Who are the people who most often get hurt in the workplace? It's rarely management people. It's the people in the workplace. So if you don't ask them, what are the things in your workplace that you think could hurt you? Ask them, you'll get amazing results, amazing information, and now you have the foundation to start making improvement. Next slide. And this component now is ensuring. So here, the leadership doesn't have to do these themselves. They can delegate these 6 components. Policies. So they will say, I want you to draft the policy. I will authorize it myself, but I want to make sure you have objectives established. So the leadership is engaged, they oversee it, but they may have people doing this and overseeing the process, integrating resources. They are responsible to ensure that the resources are available and making sure that the outcomes are achieved. This is normally done through meetings and management reviews, and when you look at the metrics, okay, we have done so many training courses. This is what our objective was. Have we met that objective? You may have monthly meetings, you may have quarterly meetings. That's entirely up to the organization, as long as you're making sure that the occupational health and safety outcomes that you want to achieve are actually being attained. And consultation and participation. They must ensure. How will they ensure? They should be asking their managers, tell me, how often have you met with your workers? What inputs have you got from them? And so on. So they must have some monitoring methods to make sure that the systems of consultation and participation are effectively working, and are we actually getting any improvement? So leadership has this role very critically. So they can be a step behind here, and their teams can be working on this, but they do not have to necessarily do these things themselves like they have to do the earlier ones we talked about, the actual definition, direct, and so on, provide guidance and enable. Next slide. I've got the top line: policy, roles, responsibilities, authorities, and a very, very light colored font because I won't cover those. Those are 5.1, 5.2, 5.3. I am now touching upon 5.4, which is a critical component on consultation and participation. And as we mentioned at the beginning, consultation means I will seek the views of all workers in some way or the other before making a decision. I have to give them information. For participation, you must give them information, otherwise they cannot make a decision. You cannot expect a person to make a decision if they don't have information. So it's management's role now to make sure that they provide information. Implement the processes for consultation and participation. The resources, that means they must be given time and training and the information. And this has to be done with workers and worker representatives. If you have a union or if you have other people who represent the workers, engage them as well. And do it in a collaborative way. And very importantly, remove obstacles. What are these obstacles? Fear of reprisal, for example. Or they give you inputs and you ignore them. And you say, no, I don't think you know what you're talking about. If they don't know what they're talking about, the reason is we as management did not give them the information to understand and participate meaningfully. So these are the obstacles that have to be removed by management in order to consult and participate with workers in a very collaborative way. And like I told you, getting one of the most successful stories I've seen, a company had 7 different unions, and they had basically pop and pizza in the afternoon twice a week for a few months. And all they did is they said, tell us what you think are the 3 biggest concerns in our workplace from a health and safety perspective. They got 147 ideas. Then they collated that input, made them into groups, and they came down with about 15 key things that everybody knew about now. And because they had contributed to building this database of potential hazards and risks, they were on board. Then they asked them, how can we fix them? That kind of engagement, and this company was one of the first companies to be certified in Canada. Let's move forward. Next slide. 6.1 is now we've got all our engagement. We've spoken to the people. We know what the internal issues are, what the external issues are. We've understood the needs of these external parties, trucking companies, our competitors, lobby groups, everybody's opposed to our activities or who's friendly to our activities, regulatory requirements and everything. And now we got to get cracking. So we've identified our risks. So these are the things that we need to worry about, and also opportunities. So we know that if we do this activity, we will be ahead of the competition. It's going to cost us a little money, but we will really be ahead. There's a new regulation coming around, and I know about this because I sit on the committee. Good, you participated with the external parties, and then you have the advanced information, and you were ahead of the competition. Now you are ready with the new requirement before your competitors. So it's an opportunity and a risk. You have to have structured methods to identify hazards in the workplace. And how do hazards come into the workplace? I come into work. I'm not really feeling very well, but I'm operating machines. So I've taken some medication. How will an employee be safely identified to do that? I mentioned about removing obstacles. I used to say, you're not looking too well. If you're not feeling well, you should go home. And if you say that, oh, no, he's concerned because he doesn't want to be docked for a day's pay. And if that's the concern, then we are in trouble now, because this person may now go ahead and work when they're not really feeling well enough to work and hurt themselves. And that's going to be an even bigger cost to the company because it will have an investigation, the plant may be shut down, and so on. So you have to be aware and alert and make sure you're taking care of your employees and do everything from a basis of care and concern. So identifying hazards. Okay, we've got this new machine here, but I haven't been trained on it. Okay, I'll have to make sure you're trained. Everybody must be trained before they operate equipment or machinery or do something they're not familiar with. And they should be able to comfortably speak up if they haven't got the confidence or the training to do the job. So we need to assess health and safety risks and other risks, and think of opportunities as well. You have to know what the legal requirements are. We spoke about this very briefly, and now we start taking action. Where you see these words MD, it means you have to maintain documented information. This is a new terminology that's used by the standard for procedures, what we used to call procedures. Maintaining documented information is a procedure. Retaining documented information is a record. That's the way I remember it. Retain, record. Maintain documented information is a procedure. Next slide. Yes, and this is how it flows. This whole image, 4.1, 4.2 on top, and 4.3. So what are the external issues and the internal issues? So we know what the issues are. Number the middle, 4.2, what are the needs and expectation of the workers and the interested parties? We should know their needs and expectations from our consultation and participation with them, and from the interested parties by our involvement in the community, with regulators, with our suppliers, and all other interested parties who have a stake in your business, your financiers, whoever's funding your business, everything, who are your suppliers and so on. What do they want? What do they want? They want obviously the success of everybody's organization, and only then will they succeed as well. What's the scope and the boundaries? Now you identify the hazards. What are the risks? Very structured approach. We cannot go through all the methodology for these things in such a small brief webinar. And now you look at opportunities as well and legal requirements. And from this, you will now start taking your actions to address the risks and opportunities. Very often companies do it by a risk register and what actions were taken. The next slide. Based upon these risks and opportunities, you will actually define objectives. We have had severe problems in our packaging line. People are getting injured. We will have an objective to reduce the number of injuries in the packaging line by 20% during the next 12 months. It won't happen by magic. You will now have to plan to achieve this. All right, what are we going to do? We'll ask the people what's causing their injuries. We'll ask some experts on the packaging line methodology. And simple example, I'll give you. A company made exactly this sort of a determination. They had people getting cut on their arms just below the elbow. They had 37 incidents last year. I asked them, that's too much. You have 70 employees. Half of them, or more than half of them, are getting cut every single year on average. It's not good enough, and you're not improving. So they really said, we'll improve it by 20%. That was there. They picked a number out of thin air, but what they did was amazing. They found out why it's happening. This was a stamping plant for automotive parts. And as the die gets older, 20,000 strikes, 25,000 strikes, it gets a bit blunt. That means you have a sharper edge on the stamped piece. So they said, we'll change the dies. Instead of 25,000 strikes, we'll try and reduce it to 22,000 strikes. They found an improvement. They made it 20,000. They found almost no burrs. Then they got special gloves, better gloves up to the elbow. Then they also changed the conveyor belt. When the stamping piece came off the line, they had to pick up, lift it up and twist and then put it in the box. They said, why do we make them lift it and twist? They just changed the conveyor assembly to make it a straight line. All they did is they had to lift it and drop it into the box now. Their injury rate dropped from 37 down to almost only 8. Almost a 70% improvement, not 20%. So by analyzing and planning properly to achieve the objective, they made a very successful thing. You have to have a PNMD. Next slide. Now we come to section 7, support. You cannot do anything if you don't have resources, if you have the people trained well, and if they're aware of what they need to do. And you communicate internally and externally. And you have procedures and records to support that. So these are support components. I won't go into too much detail here because we're running tight on time, but they're fairly critical. But communication is the single most important thing that you can do in a regular manner. Communication can be verbal. It's most effective. Engagement in the workplace, walking around. Competence has to be verified and you must have records for that. Awareness of what the hazards and risks are, and giving people the right resources. Like I said, they needed special gloves or they needed training or whatever that might be. And time, of course, is a big resource. The next slide. And once you've done your planning and got your resources and the support in place, we can actually start doing all the stuff. So eliminate the hazards and reduce the risk. So the standard says you will take care of all of these things that you identified and start taking care of reducing hazards, eliminating hazards, and reducing risk. And key components is every time you make an improvement also, that can initiate a risk. A simple example, a company had a ramp along which they were taking small trolleys of parts, and it was a bit slippery. So what they said is, we will put some rubberized coating on this ramp, and we will take care of the slippery ramp. What happened in the next 2 weeks? They had people tripping over the nice rubberized one. And so now they had to think of that management of change component. So every time you make a change, it can potentially introduce a new hazard. So you have to do your hazard identification and risk assessment every single time. So what did they do? They put up signage, tripping over your feet, because your shoes will grip the ramp more tightly. And for 3 or 4 weeks, they had to do that. And after that, it was okay. But they should have done that earlier. Procurement. Many risks, we talked about this earlier. Contractors and outsourcing people, they come into your facility, they don't know the hazards in your workplace. We are responsible for anybody in our workplace. Outsourcing, there's an expectation that you will impose your own health and safety requirements on any outsourced work as well. So if they do any work on your facilities, or they are doing work for you, you will have controls. And finally, emergency preparedness and response. Crucial component. You must do drills on a regular basis to make sure that people will be safe in an emergency situation. And you have to maintain records for these. Next. Monitoring, measurement, analysis, and performance evaluation. Crucial components. These are fairly standard requirements. They've always been there in the standard. If you have an objective for something, you're going to be checking that you're meeting that objective. If you say we're going to improve performance in this area, you're going to be checking on this. If you say we will do 7 training courses every year, have you done 7? If you say that we are going to look at our safety data for the air quality, the noise levels in our workplace, what is the current decibel level? It's about 78 decibels at this point in time. We want to bring it down to about 60. Are we measuring it? Are we analyzing it? Are we looking at our performance? Evaluation of compliance relates to making sure you're meeting legal and regulatory requirements. You have to do that, and that's a mandatory requirement. Are you doing that? Are you doing internal audits to make sure that your complete management system is functional and meeting requirements? If it's not, you should document what's not meeting requirements and go back to the drawing board, make corrections or corrective actions, and improve your audit process and your occupational health and management system. And then you wrap the whole thing up by a management review. Top management is crucial in taking part in this exercise. Next slide. Improvement. So we've got all the inputs now, and I have a rule to mandatory. I have to improve the performance of my occupational health and safety system. You can't say, I gave you the example of the company that had 37 injuries every year on average on the cuts and bruises. They weren't improving. They were therefore failing to meet the requirement of the standard to improve occupational health and safety performance. So I wrote a non-conformity on this, and the next time they came around, they did it. They were tracking incidents, non-conformities, and corrective actions. They took very effective corrective action in that situation. And then keep on continually improving. It's a requirement of the standard. Next slide. So here, I'm going to talk very briefly about integration with the core standards, occupational health and safety, environmental and quality systems. All of the standards have exactly the same 10 sections and the same headings and the same definitions in many cases, with minor adjustments to make it relevant to the context of the standard. It will help in reducing duplication and documentation work, and the process will be similar. So if I'm going to, for example, I have a paint booth. If I want to see the quality component, I will say, okay, what is the nozzle pressure on that paint? Are you using the right color of paint? Is it the right paint thickness? That's the quality component. How am I disposing of all of the environmental rags and all that in the cleaning components? What about the spray? What about the air filtration systems? How am I disposing of those in the paint booths? the safety systems, is there a lot of noise over there? Like, am I potentially breathing in any solvents? Have I got protective equipment, or do I have a completely sheltered booth and I don't have to worry about that? All of that is looked at the same time when I'm in that area. So now my audit has reduced my time and I can do it much more efficiently. So integration has huge benefits from efficiency and cost perspectives. Next slide. That's the session completed, and we'll be open for questions. We are just on the 2 o'clock mark. We started maybe a couple of minutes late, but I hope you all don't mind. I will be waiting as long as you all want to answer your questions. Is that okay with you, Holly as well?
Absolutely, Kershid. Thank you so much for your presentation. We've got lots of complimentary comments along the way here and a number of questions. So let me dive right in here. And folks, I'll just remind everyone that we will be recording the webinars. So if you have to drop off, you'll receive a link to the recording as well as the webinar deck within 2 business days. All right, from Jeff, how much emphasis is placed on the standard on compliance? What elements of the standard ensure or support compliance? And also, what do registration auditors typically focus on with regards to compliance?
Okay, I'll have to take them one by one. Holly, I didn't get all of them that quickly.
Yep,
so I first pick a question. Jeff, thanks a lot. That's a very relevant question you raised. Compliance is the absolute basic foundation. You must comply with legal requirements. If you do not, there's some clauses of the standard that auditors are obligated to raise what we call as major nonconformities. If you're not aware of legal requirements that apply to your business, the main ones, and are not complying with legal requirements, we will write that as a major nonconformity in most cases. Now, sometimes as a new requirement, you've done a pretty good job overall, but there's 1 or 2 things you've missed out. That's not critical unless it impacts a significant known requirement that everybody should be aware of. For example, recently there was a situation where we had the standards had changed and the regulatory requirements had changed regarding violence and harassment in the workplace. This was a few years back. It was well publicized and so on, and companies had it. So they did, for example, all the necessary, they thought everybody has been trained, but they hadn't trained a few people. That's not a major nonconformity. You missed some. Some people on maternity leave. Some people were on vacation. But they should have had a system in place to make sure that everybody is made aware of the requirements and have received their mandatory training. Did that answer your question to some degree, Jeff?
Yeah, he'll put in through here. So just to layer the context, because there are a few other questions that just spoke about sort of the emphasis between, or rather the how do we differentiate between regulatory and legal requirements? And they really are essentially one and the same in that any sort of local or regional regulatory bodies would be sort of in line with the law. Is that correct, Kershid?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
That you answered that very well. Yes, they are used in some cases. There is a legal nuance to it, which a lawyer will explain. A regulatory thing is something that's enforced. A legal requirement is also required to be enforced, but there's a different level of jurisdiction, I think, in that.
Yeah, and with regards to the second part of Jeff's question, and Jeff, feel free to chime in here, but the second part of that question is also, what do registration auditors or third-party auditors typically focus on with regards to compliance?
Like I said, typically that would start with, the auditor would typically, we subscribe to environmental newsletters and the Gazette in Canada, and we look at OSHA changes and make sure that we're up to date for the industry we're going to audit. So if I'm going to audit a chemical industry, I'll look at the Gazette and look what's changed in the last 6 months to a year. So my knowledge no auditor will have a detailed knowledge of all of the different industries they audit. So we have to do some research. Auditors typically have a subscription to these sponsored by the company that they work for, and they will read up about what the requirements are, and they should be reasonably, I think they typically have training annually on legal requirements as well. So now they will say, okay, I know this regulatory requirement has changed. Can you show me that you are aware of this requirement? Do you have this documented in your register of legal requirements or regulatory requirements? And they say, yes, I normally go to the Gazette myself, and this is how I keep informed about changes. And I know this didn't affect us, but I have made note of it. And there was a new component on air emissions from boilers and from exhaust fans. So I've looked at this. I'm looking at their method to keep informed about changes to legal requirements and regulatory requirements. That's step one. If they have that in place, then I will sample a couple of legal requirements that I know are relatively new possibly, or that may be more critical. There's a new requirement for construction industries now. Everybody's been talking, it's in the news everywhere about working at heights. So everybody's pretty much on board with that. But now what about asbestos regulations? Nobody's talking about that. So let's take a look at that. You have asbestos in your workplace. You identified it. Is the marking correct? Let's take a look at this. And then typically your risk register would identify things that are new or that are potentially higher hazard with a higher risk rating. So I will focus on those higher risk ratings when I do my audit and ask people in the workplace, can you tell me a little bit about this new change that has been made and how you've been made aware of it? So this is how auditors would normally look at this, and I would say, okay, I think you've understood the requirement. You've made the people who need to know about this legal requirement that's changed about the requirement, and they have been given training. So that is how we would typically audit compliance to legal and other requirements.
That's a great answer. Thanks, Kershid. What's the difference between COR certification and this ISO 45001 standard?
All right, COR is a certificate of recognition that has been introduced in many jurisdictions in Canada. Alberta, BC has them, Eastern provinces. They're getting increasingly congruent with management. BC years ago, comparing at that time what was the 18,001 standard, the Canadian Z1000 standard, and the BC COR. And there were a few things about management responsibility and so on that were not there at that time. And they introduced these changes. So they've made them more and more congruent. And these are not globally recognized now. And I see that, I expect, of course, that many of these CORs will sort of bring themselves in alignment, and companies can choose to get benefits from their insurance bodies and so on by virtue of complying with any of these safety parameters. You will find that many of these standards are very similar. I delivered a presentation to a very large company a few years ago, and they asked me exactly, what about the American Z10 standard and the Canadian Z1000 standard and the 18,000? Can you give us a comparison? I said, yes, this is a side-by-side comparison, and the only thing, the difference that came out is one of the standards had more stringent requirements for documented information, for procedures. But I said, you can do any one of these standards and improve your management system. So in essence, almost all of them talk about the same methodology. You must know your facilities, you must have communication awareness, you must know what the hazards are in the workplace, you must know the extent of risk, the level of danger, in other words. And then for every single of those, you must have some planning and actions to eliminate that hazard or reduce it to the lowest possible level.
Okay, thank you. This is from Ed. We've already recertified to ISO 9001 and 14001, the 2015 standards. What else do we need to do relative to the context and interested parties? Sorry, Kershid, did I lose you there for a second?
I think I missed something. The audio went off for a second or two there.
Sorry about that. So this is from Ed. He's indicated they've already recertified to ISO 9 and 14, the 2015 standards.
Yeah, okay. All right.
They do have, what else is needed relative to the context and interested parties? They have a robust SWOT analysis that they do for risk management. So I guess tips to prepare for the upgrade.
This is one of the biggest benefits for your organization, Ed, here. If you have been certified to 9000 and 14001, you have all of the components in place already with the relating to the 9000, the quality systems and the environmental systems. You have to just use exactly the same modality. Most of your procedures, in fact, would not need much changing. For example, your training methodologies, how you maintain documentation, all of that should not be require any significant effort. What you will have to do is just turn the lens in a different direction. And now, instead of looking at the quality of the product you're making or the service you're providing or looking at the environmental aspects, I am now looking at the health and safety aspects and impacts, what you call the risks and hazards. So that's the only thing that you'll have to do. And of course, whatever legal requirements are unique to the health and safety program. So the legal requirements will be unique. The context of the some people may see that, okay, I see that smoke coming out of your smokestack. Okay, it's an eyesore, but I don't know if it's a health and safety risk as well. The noise, okay, it's a bit of an irritant, but is it loud enough to cause harm to my hearing? So that perspective has to be looked at, and the perception of a hazard is also enough to be for any interested parties. In fact, the definition of interested party says that any organization or person who is affected, can be affected, or perceives themselves to be affected. So you have to give your engagement, get your people walking around and understanding all of those things. So everything is to be done from a different lens, nothing more than that.
Sure. And there's also training to help with migration to understand going from the current version of the OHS standards to the new one. That obviously is an option as well. From Gary.
Yeah. That would definitely be required, yes.
Yeah. Since there are 3 standards that are similar in context, can the registration audits be conducted simultaneously as well?
Absolutely. The only criteria that the accreditation bodies will require is that the audit team has the competency to audit all the requirements of the standard concurrently. The challenges may come in the operational control areas, because an auditor may not have the background from an occupational health and safety perspective to look at certain hazards. They may be conversant from a quality perspective. I know how this is manufactured, but I'm not familiar with hazards and risks in this kind of a workplace. So in that case, you may require a multi-pronged audit team, and you may have what are called as administrative auditors who can take care of some of the more basic requirements such as training, documentation, corrective and preventive action, and so on. Even corrective and preventive action may require some specialized knowledge on the nature and the reason for the potential incident that took place. So in some areas, you'd have somebody who has got what we call industry sector codes. And this is a competence area for auditors and certification bodies to address when selecting the audit team, to make sure that the entire team as a whole has the competency to complete the audit, and assigning the audit team members only to those areas where they have competence to audit them effectively.
Yeah, sure. Certainly a big advantage to do all 3 of those standards in one audit for both the customer as well as the certification body. Yeah. Can you just comment? There's a couple of questions on the RD. So let me just click back through the slide here.
Okay.
When you had these 2 icons, Khurshid, just put the context for the folks on the call. Yeah.
Yes. Now this relates to a requirement, or most of us are familiar with the terminology that was used previously. You're required to have a procedure, documented procedure, or establish a procedure. Establishing a procedure means that it may be verbal as well. So if I have 3 people doing some cleaning activity on, let's say, a simple assembly area, they do this every day, and I talk to them and ask them, how do you do this job? And they say, we come in here, we basically use this equipment, we first vacuum it, then we clean it with this cloth, and then we spray it down with this, wipe it down, and that's a procedure. It's not written down, it's an established procedure. There are only 3 people doing it. And I interview them, I ask 2 of them, and they give me the same answer. I'm happy, it's an established procedure. In some cases, the standard used to say the organization shall have a documented procedure to do this. Documented means it has to be written down in some form or the other. That means it could be posted on the wall, it could be on a computer, it could be in a book, whatever it is. And now I have to see, what does that procedure say? And then I will have that as a documented procedure. The standard now says they've done away with the terms procedure and records. But record would be something that shows, okay, I inspected this item over here, and I have a record to say I inspected it at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and this was the value I got, these are the dimensions I got, and I'm signing off that it was okay. That's the record of inspection. Or I trained somebody, I trained 6 people on this component of the how to do this job, and these are the people, and I have a training record. That's a record. The standard now calls these documented information. And they use the term, instead of procedure, they use the term, the organization shall maintain documented information for a procedure. Or in some cases, they may just, there's another word they use as well, not maintain. For example, the scopes is not a it's not a procedure. So you just got to keep that as documented information as well. So some standards use the word maintain, some use a slightly different word, and it's not coming to mind right off the top of my head right now. I think I had it somewhere here. Yeah, so maintaining is you have a procedure or a posting or something like that. Your scope statement is not a procedure, but it is required to be kept as documented information. But record is retain documented information. So the codes that I've used are RD and MD, just for convenience. And what I can do through Holly is maybe we can send a cheat sheet out that lists where the standard says you are going to maintain or retain documented information.
Sure, that's great. Well, with that, we've gone a few minutes over, Khurshid, so we have a few additional questions. I'm going to send them through to you so you can follow up with the folks. I want to thank you again for your presentation, okay. Khurshid. It was very insightful, and thanks to everyone for attending. I'll end the webinar now and just remind everyone that we will send a link to the recording as well as the slide deck within 2 business days. And thanks again. Have a wonderful day.
And thank you everyone again for attending this session. And like you have said, we have other questions. We'll follow up as best we can by email. Thank you.